Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Voices. Today, we'll have Hispanic employees discuss the pursuit of racial justice. As you remember, we began these discussions during the summer by asking several Black employees to also discuss the pursuit of racial justice. The panelists were able to share their thoughts on a variety of topics, including the Black Lives Matter movement and their experiences with implicit as well as explicit racism on campus. We received great feedback from that initial discussion. I anticipate another robust discussion today. Now I will turn the program over to Dr. Helen Brewer, the Vice President of Enrollment Management and Student Affairs, who is serving as the moderator for today's discussion. Helen?
Thank you so much, Melissa. Good afternoon and bienvenidos to Nuestras Voces, our Voices. I want to first thank Melissa Roy and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for hosting this wonderful event this afternoon. This afternoon on Nuestras Voces, our employee panel will discuss, as Melissa said, the Latino Hispanic perspective on the pursuit of racial justice. So I've already been introduced, and it's a pleasure to be here today to serve as your moderator. Our panelists, I'll introduce them now, and each of their video is ready. Our panelists include Madelene Aponte, Robert Fuentes, Domingo Rodriguez, and Ydania Santos. Hello and welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
So as we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month between September 15th to October 15th, what comes to mind is that we're celebrating the contributions of those who are descendants of those from Spain, Mexico, the Caribbean, Central and South America. And so really in thinking about Hispanic Heritage Month and what we're celebrating, tell us a little bit, if we could start with each one of the panelists, to talk about what it means to be Hispanic or Latino, or how do you identify when describing your ethnic and cultural background? So why don't we start with Idania?
Oh, I knew that was gonna be me, the first one. Sensed it. So I will say that when I see myself as Latina. Obviously, when I have to fill out documents, I put Hispanic. But for me, being Latina is about community, is about family, it's about a unity, it's about welcoming and loving everyone. Because the way I was raised was that you embrace everyone. Like, it doesn't matter what color, shape they are, you know, everyone's unique in their own way, and you got to celebrate their uniqueness. And I try to instill that now in my daughter. Like, no matter what, I'm like, it doesn't matter the color of a person, or if they have an accent, or if they don't, you know, everyone's unique and it's okay. So for me, it's about celebrating the diversity and being welcoming and loving to everyone and realizing that every individual is different.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So I'm going in order of where we are here in our Hollywood Square, so to speak. And next in the order is, I see Sunny Reyes. Sunny, can you answer the same question? How do you identify?
Yes. Good evening. I identify myself as a proud Latin American. I do know that it can be frowned upon to be too proud in public. You know, I've been in a grocery store and overheard Latinos talking in Spanish, and you know, heard customers frowning upon that, and you know, saying to themselves, "This is America. You know, we speak English here. Why do they feel that they need to speak Spanish in this country?" You know, I don't know how to speak Spanish. My mom never taught me. The reason she didn't teach me how to speak Spanish was she was fearful of me having an accent and me not perfecting the English grammar. So, you know, she was doing that as a way to protect me. So, you know, I am proud, but as a child, it can be confusing and stressful growing up Latino. So that's my experience.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Madelene.
Hi, everyone. Actually, whenever I'm asked what am I actually say I'm Puerto Rican first and Latina second. I mean, to me, it's just who I am. I'm both. I'm proud that, you know, my family is from Puerto Rico. I'm proud that I'm Latina, that I speak Spanish. I was able to hold on to that. That's just what I identify with, what I identify myself with. you know, in my family, I have every color of the rainbow in terms of skin tone, hair type, and everything else. My daughter looks exactly like me, but she's blonde with blue eyes. You know, my son is a little darker than me. So in my family, your color doesn't really mean much. It's, you know, what's in our hearts. We love each other. We're inclusive. You know, I've taught my children not to look at color or race, or to also not look at where you know, I started by saying I'm Puerto Rican, but that's not to say that I don't care for or embrace all other Latinos, because we are, as much as we are different, we are all the same. You know, we all have, you know, the basic family first mentality and so on. So, you know, that's where I hail from. We embrace each other. So it's a source of pride when I look at where my family, you know, what we've done. My parents didn't go to college. I was the first one in my family to graduate from college, you know, and overcome some obstacles and different things that were put in my path because I was Latina, and, you know, not just being Puerto Rican, but I was also a woman. So I remember being in grade school, being in Catholic school, and the only teacher who really didn't like me was the principal. And she looked at me one day and said to me, I was in 8th grade, I'll never forget it. She goes, well, you're not going to amount to anything. You're probably going to end up pregnant and you'll never even graduate from high school. Mind you, this was after I was the only student in my middle school who got accepted to Bronx Science in New York City, which is one of the specialized high schools. So, you know, it's things that you go through it's eye-opening, but that's part of my story.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to come back to something you said in just a minute, but I want to give Robert, who's next on my squares, an opportunity to also answer the question that was posed earlier.
Well, thanks. I identify as Cuban since I'm 100% Cuban, and I grew up in South Florida. And what we heard growing up in the supermarkets and everywhere in Fort Lauderdale, Miami, was Spanish. And what we heard in the supermarkets was, hey, why are you guys speaking English? Speak Spanish. That's your language. So I grew up in an area of the country that has millions of Spanish speakers from all over the world. And we were never made to feel different or un-American. Quite the contrary. We were encouraged, like in Sonny's family, to speak English. I identify as Cuban first, sometimes Hispanic, but more typically these days Latinx. For me, that really means, like Ydania said, and the others have said, being part of a very big, multiracial, multinational family with a long and distinguished history. You know, with a great many customs, traditions, variations, and races. Personally, for me, it means that I can feel at home in a lot of different places around the country and around the hemisphere, and I love that. I can go to various Latinx or Afro-Cuban or Puerto Rican or Salvadoran, or, you know, you name the variation, and we have a Latinx connection, and that's a great thing because I have a huge extended family, many members whom I have still to meet. So it's a great thing.
Thank you. So that, you know, you bring up a good point, and I think that theme that keeps running throughout all of your responses is that of family, right? And Madelene, you said it first, that's really a common value system that we have in the Latinx, Latino, Hispanic, and I think that now with the term Latinx, there's a lot of discussion about which one of those do I fit in, which one should I be using, which one do I prefer to use. So it's interesting to kind of hear all of your different perspectives. It was interesting too that Madelene, you brought up the fact that the principal at your school had said that, you know, you'd amount to nothing, you'd probably end up pregnant. And I've heard that repeatedly a lot in terms of some of the misconceptions and stereotypes often of specifically Latino women. And one of the things that I wanted to ask was, you know, what would you say from your perspective are the most commonly held misconceptions about the Hispanic or Latino community that you've encountered? And I know a particular order, whoever wants to start can feel free to do so. And then also to how does that make you feel, and your thoughts about it?
I don't mind going first.
Okay.
Okay. So I would say that for Latina women, usually they often think that we're sassy, we're promiscuous, or at times submissive. And many times that I know where I grew up in the Bronx, grew up in the projects. So the majority of my friends were having babies at 15, 16 years old. So when I didn't have that, and I'm like, no, I wasn't a mom at 25, 26, it was like, oh, you didn't have a baby yet? And it just wasn't, my mother instilled in me, listen, you're not going to be like everybody else. Yeah, we live in this area, but I need you to be more. And even now, even at work many times, with me, what you see is what you get. I'm not a lot of fluff and, real sensitive. I say how I feel, and either you take it or leave it, but in a respectful way. And oftentimes I'm out, oh, you're sassy, you have an attitude, you got that Bronx attitude. And I'm like, it's not a Bronx attitude. Or you have that Puerto Rican flair. And I'm just like, I'm just being me. But I have come across that not only at work, but in schools. I was once told at my prior job, oh, I would have never thought you look so pretty when you comb your hair. And my hair for that day was blown out. And I remember being like, what do you mean when I comb my hair? I comb my hair every day. And I've encountered, oh, your hair's so wild, and I'm like, my hair's curly, it's not wild. And I not to toot my own horn, I'm like, I look pretty well, I have it in a bun, whether it's curly or whether it's straight. It's just not when I comb it every day. It just may come out different. My hair is also, it may acclimate to how the weather is, that's just to a part of who I am, and I embrace it. But those are things that I've learned. They're like, you have, you hear it, you have good hair, you have bad hair, you have, curly hair, you have thick hair. And it's like, my family comes just like Madelene, all shapes, sizes, hair types, like you name it, we have it. And I embrace it all. But I also think that many times Hispanic women are looked at like we have attitudes. We could be our nicest and it's like, oh, she has an attitude. I don't have an attitude. Just not always smiley and bubbly. If I see you, hello, how are you? But I don't need to walk around like cheesing the whole time either.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Sunny, Robert, we want to make sure that we don't just overpower you. We talked about hair and women and some of the stereotypes and misconceptions. So what are some of the misconceptions just about Latinos in general or Hispanics in general or men or Latino men that you may have experienced or from your perspective are pervasive?
That we all speak English, all speak Spanish. That is that, and that I find that, a lot of Puerto Ricans like myself that don't speak Spanish. I wish I did. I joke with my mom, all the time, she costs me a little bit of money per hour if I was bilingual. But that's a misconception. That we all speak Spanish. I'm fluent in Spanglish, but I do not really speak Spanish well.
Okay, fluent in Spanglish. Okay, Robert, what about you?
I think I agree with what the other panelists have said, and with what Sunny said on the language issue. Where I've come from, my experience, for the Cubans, it really focuses on, there's a variety of intellectual and political beliefs. They really occupy a lot of places on the spectrum. Mm-hmm. But the older generations, the ones that came over from Cuba in the first wave and maybe in the second wave in the later 60s, they tend to be very traditionally minded, very conservative politically, and this is sort of the expectation when people always tend to ask me, they wonder about my political affiliation for some reason, or what I think about something happening in Cuba, at the moment. Maybe I should be, I've heard a couple of times, aren't you angry? And that I should be angry. And, a lot of times the reality is, is a little different. Many of us intellectually and emotionally come from a place of exile or displacement. And like I think Sunny mentioned, this can give us, when we're younger, a sense of confusion about who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to act. And then we're confronted with other people's ideas, preconceived ideas already of who we are when we're not sure ourselves based on that. So that can sometimes lead, though I've found personally, and many people I know, to a stronger sense of awareness, since we often tend to compare and contrast things here in the United States with another place, whether it's idealized or not. And that I've found can be a very enlightening process that opens new perspectives. And sometimes people don't expect that. They expect a very sort of monolithic cultural and racial group. And that's not who Latinos are. We're like, we're like a very big family with all kinds of colors, ideas, beliefs, habits, dialects, preferences. And that's the most common thing that I've experienced, surprise.
Thank you. You bring up a really good point, and I think this is what has been said before, is that just about the diversity in terms of race among the Latino culture, the Hispanic culture, where we do have, individuals who may look white or Caucasian, or others who may look Black, or who, the Afro-Latino experience is another, to kind of, as more diverse communities come together and families join and so forth, the experience becomes more and more diverse. So it's not just about how one individual looks. There isn't a stereotype, I think, to what a Latino or Hispanic person looks like. Some of us have curly hair and some of us have straight hair. And Madelene's daughter is blue eyes and blonde hair. So we are very unique in that way. And I think that's something rich that adds to our culture. So Madelene, what are some misconceptions that you think are out there about this culture?
Well, I think another misconception that some people have is they think that Latinos don't want to speak English, or whenever I'm in a room, if I start talking to Spanish to someone else, oftentimes depending on who's around, if I'm in a room with people who don't speak Spanish, I'll speak English. Or if I happen to say something in Spanish, I'll try to consciously translate it. But oftentimes, I've been in situations where I've been in my office talking with someone who's Spanish speaking, talking to them in Spanish, and people outside of my office are assuming that we're talking about them because we're talking in Spanish, or we'll get offended, or you'll hear them mumble under their breath, "You should just speak English." And yes, as I said, if I'm in a room with someone who only speaks English, I'm obviously not going to speak Spanish, but to me, it's a little bit rude for someone else if I'm in my own office or in my own space speaking with someone who happens to be Spanish. And if we happen to switch into Spanish, to just say, "Oh, well, you're in America." America doesn't have an official language. So that's one of the things that people here will often say to Latinos, or they'll assume that if you're Latin, that you don't speak English, or that you don't speak English well. I was in a situation where I was out, and someone obviously thought, I look Hispanic. So they asked me a question and they answered, and they responded, "Oh, you speak good English." And my response was, "Well, I should. I was actually born in New York City." But, it was just, people look at you and they just assume something from your appearance, or they judge you based on your appearance without knowing anything about you. I remember I had my daughter when I was 23, and yeah, she's very light skinned. And I was in the mall at the time. I lived in Ithaca, New York, and an older white woman walked by. She looked at us and she goes, "Oh, what a beautiful child. Are you her nanny?" Mm-hmm. And of course, my daughter at that moment chose to say "mommy" and wanted me to pick her up. So, but those are the kinds of experiences that, it upsets you. You try not to react in an you take it in stride, but the ignorance that some people have, or their preconceived notions just because of what you look like. And I'm sure, you know, it happens to us as Latinos, it happens to African Americans, you know, so I'm hoping that we will at some point get to a place where people no longer do that as much as they do right now.
So, you know, you talked about perhaps even on campus, maybe having spoken Spanish and having experienced a negative reaction to that, to using your linguistic skills. But for all the panelists, can you talk about a time if you've experienced discrimination or microaggressions associated with your race, ethnicity, or your cultural identity at RCC, or observed it for perhaps happening with someone else?
I did observe it a few times. Like Glenda mentioned, when I was in school in Ithaca, I don't know what it is about that area in particular, but I mean, growing up in South Florida with such a huge number of Spanish speakers, people speaking Spanish, signs being in Spanish, the default when I was growing up seemed to be Spanish. And in the Northeast, people seem to be more conscious of others speaking different languages. I'm not sure why that is. I know that when I was in Ithaca for several years studying and then teaching there at Cornell, you know, many students did experience discrimination just based on their appearance or on speaking Spanish, which always surprises me. This is the United States, and we're full of you know, dozens, if not hundreds, of different languages. And you know, people speak Russian, people speak German, whatever language it may be. I don't understand it. I do recall several years ago, many years ago on campus, when a very distinguished professor, no longer with us, I'm not sure why it came up, but they felt the need to tell me how excellent my English was. I was like, oh, well, I have studied English, and I've read English, and I teach English, so that comes in very handy. That was my response. I was like, thank you, I suppose. You know, you're sort of taken aback because you don't know how to really react to something that comes at you out of the blue like that. It's just it's sort of a surprise. But for the most part, I haven't experienced, not for the most part, but you know, my overwhelming experience on campus has been positive. I'm seeing more Latino, Latinx, Hispanic students than ever, and I think that experience of mine was sort of an outlier.
Great. I'm glad to hear it was an outlier, but what do you think could have been, perhaps I'm assuming that person was trying to pay a compliment and giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a theme we hear over and over again, like you're very well spoken, or you know, your English is really good. How did you learn English so well? What could have been, what are ways that people can perhaps better understand what impact that statement has? Or what is there something that we can do to help others? And there's a lot of people on this listening in on this panel today, and maybe, is there something that could be done differently? Is that something offensive? Let's be clear. Is that something offensive to you when people tell you that you're well spoken, or that your English is really good?
It's very surprising at a minimum.
Okay.
And I think in my instance, like you said, Dr. Brewer, the person meant well, but I think it came from a place of they're the norm and I was the other. And that's a weird feeling. You know, I can sort of separate intellectually what was happening from emotionally what was happening, and the two were not the same. I thought it was rude. I thought it was misguided. Intellectually I understood it, but emotionally I was like, that is extremely rude. Why wouldn't I speak English well? I am a professor of English. You would assume that you know a few rules. But yes, I thought it was rude, and I think it's important in those situations not to be silent and to speak up and point it out and say, you know what, I understand maybe where you're coming from, but that's rude. Why wouldn't I? And that might be a little confrontational, but sometimes if it goes on, that's what has to be done. Sometimes ignorance or best intentions, you can understand them, but they can lead to sort of kind of a festering atmosphere, and that's not good. That has to be nipped in the bud as soon as possible. And it can be done privately in a gentle way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So again, the question, have you experienced discrimination or microaggressions associated with your race, ethnicity, or cultural identity at RCC? Anyone else on the panel want to speak to that?
Yeah, I did witness something several years ago that was alarming. Personally, my experiences here have been overwhelmingly positive, but I also think a lot of it has to do with the way that I carry myself and the way that I dress, because I find that I heard Jason Tomlinson during the Black Lives Matter panel talk about how he is treated differently when he's in street clothes on Saturday and Sunday as opposed to when he's in his work clothes. But I remember I was on the lunch line in the cafeteria, and the two cashiers were talking Spanish. And I remember someone saying, you know, I don't know why they do that. They do that all the time. You know, we're in America. You know, they need to speak English. Do they even know how to speak English? And I remember hearing that. The cashier heard it too and had something to say about it. But I remember hearing that and thinking how ignorant that comment was and how hurtful it was. You know, this is America. We don't have an official language here. If they choose to talk, you know, privately amongst themselves in their language, so be it. You know, it doesn't change my day any bit. And I don't know why it frustrated them. And they carried on for some time. You know, and it was hurtful. It was hurtful. I felt embarrassment for the cashiers to have to deal with something like that at this day and age. But for me personally, I've had a lot of good experiences here.
Great, thank you. Madelene or Ydania?
No, as I said, it had happened. I haven't had anything happen anytime recently. My experience was years and years ago. And you are taken aback if someone tells you, oh, you're well-spoken or you speak English well. Because it means that they have an assumption that because you're Latinx or Latina or Hispanic or however you want to identify, that because that's who you are, that you wouldn't speak well or that you wouldn't speak intelligently. And I think sometimes there's a stereotype that we may be uneducated. And they use that lens to talk to, you know, in terms of how they speak to you. So I'm glad to say that I haven't had those experiences lately at RCC, but I know that they're still there. They're part of my everyday life in other ways, or have been throughout my lifetime. And every time it happens, it kind of just, it throws you back. You know, it makes you think, wow, it's still happening now. I thought that 10 years ago when they made that comment to me, or 26 years ago when they made that comment about me being my daughter's nanny, that, you know, hopefully it should be getting better. But as we, you know, some things get better, and I think sometimes some things become less overt and more ingrained. And I say that in the sense of, part of me always thinks, you know, sometimes, unfortunately, that depending on who I'm speaking with, when they make certain comments, I start to think, oh, they're thinking about me in a negative light. You know, they're not taking into account that, you know, my education or where I've gone or what I've done, they're seeing someone who's an uneducated Hispanic. And you feel those nuances sometimes in how someone speaks to you or of you, but it, that's the scary thing. I think now in the past, people more freely said things. They didn't filter things. Now I think they filter things and it's a little bit less overt, more covert.
That's an excellent point. And I think that's what we've been talking about too a lot with the term microaggressions and really the subtleties, the subtle comments that are sometimes made or the subtle gestures that are sometimes made too. And I think there's also too more of an awareness now that that's what's happening. I think before people, as Robert said before, intellectually you're seeing it like, well, I can reason why that happened, but emotionally there is that raw feeling that kind of comes out from experiencing those things. And so the more we can kind of recognize that, and as Robert said, address them. And that doesn't have to be, it can be quiet, it can be more boisterous, but addressing it, I think, is the key point that I'm really hearing from this panel. So Ydania, what about you?
I can honestly say I've experienced several incidences that have left me with a dislike, like a distaste in my mouth, but it's like, this is my job. I will say that I've had to correct people at that moment, because sometimes you need to call people out right at that moment. One that stands out for me a lot is with my name. Like when I first started working at RCC, I remember being told, it was like, oh, Yolanda. And I'm like, no, my name is Idania. Oh, Yolanda. No, my name is Idania. And someone was like, all you Dominicans always have a Y in your name and it's always Yolanda. I was like, well, first and foremost, with all due respect, I'm Puerto Rican. Second of all, my name is Idania. You have a nickname? Well, you have a choice. You could call me Idania, you could call me Miss Santos. Those are your choices, because that's my name. And I often get that, oh, you don't have a nickname? No, my name is Idania. It'll take some time to get it, but once you get it, you'll be able to pronounce it. Or you could just call me Miss Santos. So I've also experienced, and even I can honestly say, speaking with Madelene, we cross the hallway, or we run into each other in the restroom, and we're talking like, how's your kids, or how's your daughter, how's your this, and people have said, enough of that, none of that Spanish talk here, you're at work. And it's like, we're actually talking about our personal life, and not for nothing, we don't want the whole hallway to hear about what we're going through with our kids. It's just something personal. So, and it's like, we weren't speaking to you. It's like I'm not for confrontation, but there are times that, especially in the workplace, I've realized, I don't know if it's because the way I look, I may look younger, because I've also had people tell me, oh, I would have never thought you had 2 master's degree. And I'm like, you would have never thought, oh, wow. I've had colleagues of ours, oh, well, I have a master's, and as do I have my credentials as well. Calmly, but when you say it at that moment, it makes people be like, oh my God. Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it like that. No problem. But sometimes it makes them aware, and because of those those situations that I've been in, that I've had to correct people at that moment, they may think twice when they speak, and they're mindful on how they speak to me. Because even after I had to correct someone in a meeting, in an open forum meeting, Yolanda, and I wouldn't even turn to the person. And the meeting was starting, and I was just like, I've addressed several times with you, my name is Idania. Please address me by Idania, or I will continue to ignore you every time we have an encounter and you call me Yolanda.
Yeah, so, having had those experiences, and I'm glad to hear that for the most part. I mean, Idania, you mentioned that, they've been recent in terms of sometimes some personal conversations you may be having with someone else. But I'm glad to hear that it's not something pervasive that is happening as frequent as it has perhaps in other areas. But I think it's something that we can't ignore, and something that we can't say, well, that doesn't really happen here, and so we're okay. So what I really would like to know from you is, what recommendations do you have for what our community can do to create a culture of inclusion and support for Latinx, Hispanic employees, and recommendations that you think would be important?
think this is a great start. The Black Lives Matter panel discussion, today, I think we're heading in the right direction. So I think what we're doing right now is a great start, and we need to keep the conversations ongoing if we're going to have any real change.
Right, thank you.
I agree with Sunny. I think it's very important to share our experiences, share our knowledge, sometimes share our feelings. It's important for the students that we be present, that we're present for them, for other people, and remind other people that nobody does anything alone, that it's not just them. Especially for the students and for colleagues to encourage each other, especially for younger people, to be who they feel they are or who they must be. Our Hispanic culture and values, we can handle it. I think we're resilient enough that we can handle somebody being who they are without, somebody telling them who they need to be. That's important. I often say, and I truly believe that sometimes we have to celebrate ourselves, and because we're stronger together. And I think it's totally appropriate to speak our languages, no matter how well or how poorly we speak it. If we want to speak it, that's our right. I think it's important to respect and uphold our traditions to the extent we feel comfortable, not to the extent that other people are comfortable, but to the extent that we're comfortable. We should always remember who we are, where we come from, and recognize that we're not monolithic. We have differences too, but I think the Hispanic culture, I really think we can handle that. And so I think Sunny said, this is a great start. This is a great example of what we should be doing. Students do it amongst themselves, unprompted all the time. They talk about differences, they address differences, they confront them very honestly. And they're a good example for us to do that also.
Excellent points. I'm going to ask one more question, but I want to make sure that before I move on, Madelene or Ydania, anything else you'd like to say about this topic of what the college can do?
I think going forward,
Sorry, you could go.
thanks, Ydania. I think going forward, one of the things that the college can do is, as positions open, if we could look to hiring more Latinx faculty, staff, because while the population of our students has increased, I don't see a large increase in the administration, of Latinos or in the faculty. So if you want to be more inclusive, having these conversations is a start. But on the other end, if as positions open up, if there can be an effort to hire more qualified, Latinx people, then I think that would also be helpful.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Idania?
I agree with Madelene. She took the words right out of my mouth. There was a study a couple of years ago about Latinos and Latinas within higher ed and holding administrators, positions.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at it, I mean, it could be my own ignorance, but like when I look at my side of the division, I'm like, who are administrators? Me and Madelene, and now Dr. Brewer. And I will say that when they hired you, it was like, oh my God, someone I could, I felt for that moment, I felt like the student, like, wow, someone I could identify with. Yes, I would love to pluck her brain. It was just, it was a good feeling to be like, I'm seeing someone that I myself can identify with. And I think for our students, that goes a long way because, you have, and I'm sure Madeline's probably experienced it, Janira, like students will go to an office and seek out a Spanish person that if they can't speak English, or it happens to me often, nothing to do with my office, but if someone comes in, oh, Ydania, there's a Spanish speaking family, can you speak to them? Can you help them? Sure. I walk out, how can I help you? Let me take you to the office. Let me translate for you. Once I put you in good hands, then I'll go back down. But like they try to seek out someone that they can relate to, they can identify with, and also feel comfortable, even if they're speaking, their broken English or with their accents, and their parents feel comfortable explaining it to us, for us to be able to speak to someone that may only speak English. So I do think that the college has to do a better job as in hiring people that are Hispanic, that are Latina, that just so students could be like, oh, wow, because when you look at it, I had someone tell me once, they're like, oh, there's a lot of Hispanics that work here. They work in the kitchen. That's great. I'm happy they work in the kitchen, but we need more in the, administration, because our students are not always going to go, to the cafeteria for the questions that they need from us about financial aid or applying and documentation and birth certificates. I will be the first to say that when I was hired, I don't identify as bilingual. However, and I only don't identify as bilingual because I read it very slow. I can't write it, but I will. I've learned now at RCC, I get documentation in Spanish, and I'm like, they're making me learn. Like, my skill is getting better at learning. Still can't write it, but I'm getting better at reading it and speaking it. Before, I wouldn't be able to say half the documents. Now it rolls off my tongue naturally, because I'm like, when these students need me to help them, I need to bring my A game. I can't look like I don't know what I'm doing.
That's true. It's funny that you say that, Idania, because I'll never forget when I was interviewing, after I'd gone through the litany of my experiences and so forth in higher ed and everything, one particular person asked, and it was a great question to ask. It said, you list being bilingual on your resume. Why? And I'm paraphrasing right now. Or how would you use, how would that be relevant to your position? And the person, it was a great question to ask. And I thought to myself, it's not so much about being able to speak the language perfectly, Ydania. I think it's more that you've made an effort to make someone feel comfortable in their native language. And sometimes it can even be when you're speaking to someone in English and you throw in a Spanish word and there's this recognition that kind of clicks, right? And so then there's like a connection that you make with someone. So for me, it was really, being bilingual is not so much about the language. And I'll tell you, the other thing is, you're not born bilingual and all of a sudden you're just going, speaking Spanish beautifully. It's also a learned skill set. Like, I had to take 8 years of Spanish. And my family was like, why are you taking Spanish? Because I had to learn how to write it, and I learned how to learn how to read it, just like we do with the English language. So, it's funny that you talk about, translating and having to learn, the technical terms for things. But I think also too, sometimes what's more important is not so much that you know how to speak the language technically, but that you can connect with others and that you've made an effort to try and make them feel more comfortable in their native tongue. So thank you so much for that. We have one of our, there's one question in the chat, and I want to make sure I get to, because I think it's a really good question to ask, and I wish I'd thought of it sooner. But have any of you ever felt as though you had to be the voice for all Latino people when issues surface impacting the Latino community? Like, have you ever been in a room and an issue comes up that impacts the Latino community, and suddenly everyone turns to you and asks you what you think, or you feel as though you're compelled to somehow have to be the spokesperson?
That used to happen to me in college, but not so much anymore.
Why do you think it doesn't happen anymore, Robert?
Well, I think that when I was in college, X number of years ago, where I went to school, the university and the student body were not accustomed to meeting people like me. And so I was, for them, I was, a source of questions and sort of a representative of some kind. I never expected that, but that's how it turned out. But since then, a lot of things have changed, including the numbers. There's 60 million plus of us in the United States, and more apparently every day, which is a wonderful thing. And so more people have experience with Latinx people, and we're not I mean, in my personal experience, I mean, compared back to then, it's just a natural progression, I think. I can't recall a time on campus or since college. I might be dating myself then, so maybe I should stop, but I can't recall. That was not unusual in college, I'll say.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think in college and early in my financial aid career, I started in financial aid at Cornell University and I graduated from there. So I was one of 2 Latinos in the administration, and Cornell has a huge administration. So anytime there was a question, they would look at me, and I kind of felt like I would have to say something, but I would also preface it in saying, I'm one of many different Latino experiences, because I don't have the experience of emigrating here and not being from the US. I was born in New York City. So I was always a citizen. So I haven't experienced some struggles that other Latinos may have experienced. And I wanted to also, I would want people to understand that that being Latino is not one experience. It's many different experiences, but that have many common threads through them. And we're not one voice, or people need to understand that. That's why I think having more and more of us in a room having discussions like this, where we can talk about not only what makes us Latino, but also what makes us each individually unique Latinos, and what all those different experiences creates. We're a very rich and diverse community. And I think many people look at us with just one lens sometimes when they don't realize that. When they make, as I was saying before, they will make assumptions based on those things. And I agree that it doesn't happen more now. It happens much less now than it did when I was younger. I don't know if part of it may also be that maybe I'm not. When I was in college, we took over the administrative building. I used to joke when I started working at Cornell was, I took over this building and now you guys gave me keys. That was the joke in the financial aid office when I started there. But, so I'm at a different place in my life now, in one sense. So I don't know if it's that or if it's just that now, hopefully it's that now, I don't have to be that only Latin voice in a room.
Thank you. Thank you. Ydania, did you want to say something?
Okay.
Okay. We talked, and Sunny too, I'm sorry, Sunny, anything else you would like to add to that? No? Okay, you're good. So, one of the things I think too that we talked about, well, when we were in school a long time ago and what have you, but I think also technology might come into play with this too, because the information is so widespread, also to the diversity that Robert mentioned before, because of the numbers of Latinos in the country. Maybe there's a little bit less of that. But I do think that there is a lot of value in sometimes being the only one in the room, and then sometimes others just turning to you to ask you what you think to represent the entire Latino community is still something that I know I've experienced. I continue to experience at times as well. So, since we're talking about issues that impact Latinos, and it's interesting that we just had that question about, do you ever feel like you're the spokesperson for our Latino issues? But this is an issue that affects many Latinos in particular. And I use Latinos because that's how I identify, but when I say that, I'm referring to Latinx, Hispanic, or Latina groups. But one of the things that does affect the Latino community a lot is that of the issue of citizenship and immigration. And so I just kind of want to hear what your thoughts are and your perspectives are, or any concerns that you may have about the immigration debate right now, and how it affects a lot of the things that are going on with immigrant families, and children, just kind of your perspective on that.
Well, for me personally, unfortunately, the first word that comes to mind about the status of the current immigration debate is poisonous. It's become a poisonous debate. And some of the results are that some of our most vulnerable people that we can encounter are being harmed or have been harmed or may be harmed. And I think that debate has bled out, has leaked out into other areas that we've discussed about language, about identity, in many ways that I don't know if many of us anticipated that. Personally, I believe very strongly that everyone deserves a shot. Everyone deserves a chance. So I believe that for our neighbors here in the Western Hemisphere, there should be a clear and short path to citizenship if they want it. I see that as enriching our nation, empowering our nation. I know that when my family was granted asylum here, what happened is that my entire family became staunch Americans and bought into the American dream because we were given a chance, we were given a shot. And to this day, my family has talked about that almost since I can recall. And it's a very powerful thing to be given that chance and to say, you're welcome here. And that gratitude multiplies itself in wonderful ways and in ways that we can't see, but I think or always imagine, but in ways that I think are terrific for everybody here. And I hope that the debate or the discussion around immigration and about citizenship, levels out, that we sort of lower the temperature and, look at the realities of what it is. It's people wanting to come here, wanting to be Americans. I've over, 20 plus years of teaching at at a few places. I've come into contact with thousands of students, literally thousands. Some of the ones that have inspired me the most are international students. They love America. They believe in America. They want to be American. They do whatever it takes to get the job done. They're so inspiring. And I remember many of them by name because they've left such a mark on my life. And to think that for some abstract notion that belies their reality, their living reality, they could not be citizens, I find just ridiculous. So, when faced between an abstract idea, the choice between an abstract idea and a real flesh and blood person, I always go with the flesh and blood person. They deserve a shot, just like everybody else. The same shot that my family got, the same shot that many families got. They deserved it, and so that's my position.
Thank you very much. Very well said. Sunny?
Yeah, just to piggyback on my friend Professor Fuentes' statement. I think we all would love fair process, and we do want others to feel welcome here. But when you're looking on the news and you're seeing kids in cages with foil blankets, raids happening, it's sending a message, and that message is you are not welcome here. I do not have the answers, but something's got to be done. I think, we can do better. We can be better. And I hope things do change. But, we'll see. We'll see. I think we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Thank you. Madelene?
I think one thing that to me is a little bit scary is that it seems that everyone in this country forgets that they all emigrated here. The only real Americans are Native Americans, and you know, the influx of immigrants actually decimated that population. So you have people who have polarized or politicized, you know, something that all of our families that are here pretty much began as an immigrant family, regardless of whether it was in the 1800s or more recently. But more recently, I think it's become a fight about the haves and the have-nots. And if you're not already here, people don't want you to come here. Or if you're already here, but you don't have papers, they want to get rid of you. And I think it unfortunately has a lot to do with the socioeconomics of it, I think. You know, the haves are, it's being folded in a way, or it's being fed to people in a way of they're taking away from you. If you're a citizen, they're taking, these people are taking something away from you, because oftentimes they are described in ways of, oh, they're getting public assistance, we have to feed them, we have to do this. And that's usually not the case. I have found, you know, in all the years that I've worked in financial aid, I've always found that immigrant families or families who are newer to the US were more willing to do whatever was necessary to fund their child's education than not. And they would work 5 jobs and the whole family would pull money, you know, the aunts and the uncles, to put kids through college. Whereas some of the families who, you know, grew up in the US tend to have a more entitled kind of approach to like financial aid. They weren't willing, no, you got to give me the money. I can't pay this, you know, I can't afford this. That's your responsibility to make sure. So it's very, that has always been very interesting to me. So.
Thank you. Ydania?
I'm going to go back to what Robert was saying. I think at some point there has to be the view of they're human beings, because I honestly could say this weighs heavy on my heart, because I see many documentaries, and just as a mother to see kids in cages, you know, and kids sick and being ripped away from their parents, 3-year-olds, like it breaks my heart. I'm like, I understand there has to be laws in place and a process in place, but how do you rip these families apart? You know, you have, I remember I encountered last summer a student that was very nervous because the mom, her and her sister, they came here, and she said it, she was like, if I go back to my country, you know, I'll get killed. That's what they told my mom. And the whole time I'm processing, I'm like, oh, she's, you know, she wants to come to school. And the mother was like, how can I just, you know, I'll pay. I don't care what needs to be. Like, they were just focused on walking a straight and narrow. And their biggest concern was that they didn't want to put a spotlight on them because they did not want to get sent back to the country. The mother was like, I'm here in a studio with my 2 girls. And although I'm struggling, this is still a better life than what I would ever be able to provide to them in my country. And I think that speaks volumes.
Right, and how the bar is so low in terms of what will be equate to happiness, where there's so many more opportunities that people could have in their lives, right, or experiences that they could have. But it's so funny that a studio apartment with 2 children, grown, it sounds like grown children because they're coming to the college, is the threshold for happiness, and how willing.
Yeah. My heart bled for her. I was like, oh my God, like this is what our country's come to. And to them, you know, like even for anyone we're like, oh yeah, it's great, but we may take advantage of things, and the smallest things mean so much to them.
Mm-hmm. And so, you know, Sunny said, let's cross our fingers that something changes. Idania, your heart was bleeding, and Robert, you were talking about, you know, how this is like a poisonous issue. So what do you think as Latinos, as individuals, that you feel like is either your personal responsibility or that you feel that could be done, you could do personally, or actions that you could take? And I say this because there may be other people who are listening who are saying, well, what can I do? How can I help? what ideas do you have for ways people that can help with those type of situations or can mobilize together to make a change? What do you think needs to happen? That's a tough one, because if you have the solution to this, you can like write a book and we'll solve all the problems of this country, but it's a tough question.
It's
Making me
very
sweat over here.
It's very difficult. I think it's gonna it's gonna take a village, a very large village, to make this happen. And we as a village need to be equipped to do this work, and we should be prepared to persist in the work until the words, and justice for all are a reality. That's the choice. It's either that or not. I think it's simple. It's that or not doing that. We should continue to organize and work through our churches, through our community groups, our neighbors and friends, and to the extent possible, our political systems, our cultural institutions. This doesn't enter in as in literature, in teaching literature and writing, unless the student has brought it up. Just being present and seeing somebody who looks like you or who you can relate to is it's really something remarkable that a lot of people take for granted. But seeing a faculty member or an administrator who can understand you, who can meet you where you are, and having those people on campus, it makes a big difference in the lives of students, and that difference impacts us. And I find it very inspiring to have those interactions, because as Idania has mentioned, in particular, and as Madelene has mentioned, we see people going above and beyond to do to provide their children with an education, which we know as educators is the key to a better life. That's the key. Most of us are not going to be YouTube stars, unfortunately, or pop stars or basketball players, but an education will make an enormous difference in our lives. And to see people working so hard and fighting for the right, or fighting for an education, that's a wonderful thing. That's one of the wonderful things that can happen. That's inspiring. That's an emotional, visceral response that makes you feel like anything is possible. And they live that reality. And so I think that's important, to support those students in any way we can, and to replicate and establish support structures that they may need, that are unique to that population. And if we're not doing enough, to do more, and if we're doing more, to do more plus. That's what I believe.
I love that. Do more plus. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to borrow that from you.
I think something else that we need to do as a community, or start to try to do, is to stop allowing us to be pit against each other. I think a lot of times, or pit us against the African American community. We have, our numbers are such that politically we could be a very strong force, but unfortunately we allow the rhetoric to divide us, so that we're not using our voices together to accomplish something. I think it's become very easy sometimes, and it's funny, like, I'll say this. So in my family, I never talk politics with my dad, because if we ever did that, it doesn't end pretty. He has his opinion, I have mine, but part of what hurts me when that happens is that it feels like the rhetoric has now interfered in my family, because you have people who love each other, who have difference of opinion, that, you know, they butt heads because of that. And I think as a community, sometimes we let that happen way too often, where we let the opinion of others, or we buy into what others may be saying, you know, without questioning or without figuring out how can we, despite a difference of opinion, come together and use our voices to get something done.
That's an excellent segue into the question of you know, people being more united. And you know, the next question that I have for the panel is really, do Hispanic or Latinos share the concerns of Black Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter activists? So are they allies, or do they perhaps experience similar treatment in society? What do you think about that?
I think we do experience similar treatment. You know, my son's brown skin, and he could very easily be mistaken for, you know, he's mixed. So is it a concern of mine that he's going to get pulled over and have a problem? You know, absolutely. I think it's something that, yes, we need to be concerned with. And that was part of why I was talking about how we may separate ourselves from, you know, the African-American community. I know that some of the older Latinos, you know, when I was younger, one of the comments I would hear was, "Más negro que yo no quiero en esta casa," which is someone who's darker than me, I don't want in this house. And that would be in reference to, you know, if I was dating someone. I always hated that, still do. But I think that sometimes as a community, at least from my experience growing up, that we sometimes are our worst enemies in terms of how we look at, you know, because we struggle within our community with race as well as, you know, and it makes it easier for others to put wedges between us and other people that we should be supporting. You know, when my parents emigrated to New York from Puerto Rico, back then the census, you were either Black or white. There was nothing else on the census to classify you. And, you know, I grew up with the stories of, well, the worst thing was to say that you were Black, so you had the darkest Puerto Ricans or the darkest, you know, people saying, "I'm white," because they didn't identify with being either Black or white, and in their minds it was better to be white. So those types of feelings divide us instead of uniting us. They divide us from getting together and realizing that Black Lives Matter does affect us. Many of us, you know, we're no different to some of the white cops who are treating young Black men in a certain way.
Other thoughts? While we wait for the other panelists to say something regarding this topic, I think that, Madelene, one of the things that you bring up is the issue of race, even within the Latino community, and the disparities, and also too the notion, and still it's very pervasive even now, that the more the whiter you are, the better the person is, the child is. It's considered a better trait to have.
Yes.
Or if you're darker, then, you know, well, finding ways to kind of remove that identity from yourself in order to be considered as something that's valuable, as something that's wonderful. Even in when people are looking at children, for example, and they will look at a child, and if a child looks more Caucasian, it's, oh, the child's so beautiful. But if the child is darker skin or has different features in their face, or the hair texture is different, it's like, oh, she's pretty, but they hone in on one characteristic that looks less of whatever it is that they don't want you to look like. So, you know, I think that that's still a very pervasive topic, even within the Latino community, that we don't always discuss or feel comfortable discussing. And as you say, you know, that's an issue of immigration, but it also depends where it comes from too, because maybe in more Mexican, Central American countries, you have to be less indigenous, right? The whiter you are, the better you are. And maybe in the Caribbean, it's, oh, the whiter you are instead of having African roots or so forth. So there's that constant struggle that's happening in all parts of really Latin America, as we're trying to, even for ourselves, identify, be okay with our identity and be okay with who we are as people, as opposed to putting those labels on. So I think that you bring up a really good point with regard to that. Then you look like you were going to say something.
I wanted to relate to what you said. It's true, because I've experienced, my daughter's lighter than me, bone straight hair.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being with her and someone's like, oh my God, she looks nothing like you. She's so beautiful. She has straight hair. And I was there like, wow, okay, thank you. I think, that was a compliment to her, but I feel like that was a back slap to me. But I can also relate that, when I think about it as well, I have brothers that are very dark skinned, I'm actually one of the lighter people in my family. My mother's, brown skin, black hair, and people would tell her that I didn't look like her. And for me growing up, I wanted to identify with my mom, and while everybody wanted to be lighter, and even now, anyone, like when the summer comes, they'd be like, oh, what do you want? My goal in life in the summer is to get dark. And everybody's looking at me, yes, the darker I am, the prettier I feel. But that's just because to me, beauty through my mom was dark skin. My stepmother's dark skin. So for me, that's what I envision as beauty, and I'm okay. But it's the truth. When I have a tan and I feel great about myself, and then the winter comes and I got dark eyes because I'm tired and you can see everything. But I just feel like within our own culture, and Madelene is right, some fathers would be like, you're not going to bring a negro, you're not going to bring a black person now. My father's the opposite. My father would always be like, I don't care who you're with, but you're not bringing as a white man in this house. That's just how my father was. And I was just like, oh my God. He's like, I don't care. He's like, you could bring a negro, you could bring a Hispano, you could bring a black person or a Spanish person, because we're two of the same. That I don't mind, And my father just instilled that in us. So to us, even now, like my dad is like, when I see these Black Lives Matters, he was like, we matter, brown people matter. He's like, you know why? Because they'll treat us as bad as they would treat a black person. And I've had people tell me before, oh, you don't know what it is for me to be a black person. And I'm like, I don't get treated any different. Like, I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. And trust me, they give me the side eye, and I don't look, your typical blonde hair, blue eyes, I'm beautiful. So when all this happened with Black Lives Matter, like it broke my heart. And I still see, I'm like, wow. And I've learned, I'm like, they're killing out brown people, because the reality is, we're all shades. And whether we're Spanish or not, to me, we're two of the same. And I'm going to be in support of them. And I would only hope that they will want to be in support of me as well, because trust me, we've faced the same struggles, and nothing is going to get fixed overnight. And we're going to continue to face these same struggles. Although we're trying to change the world, it's not going to change as quickly as we would like. And history has proven that it really hasn't changed that much.
Thank you. Sonia or Robert?
I think we do share the same concerns. Black and brown people do share the same concerns from racial justice, employment, education, criminal justice. We all have those same challenges. And it's nice to see the Latin community coming out in support when I turn on the news, because we are all the same. I don't see us being any different at all. I think we get treated the same. So it's nice to see that we are coming out in support. And hopefully, folks will start to change some. It's no longer a partisan issue. It's a moral issue. I think we need to do better, and I hope to see it in my lifetime.
Thank you. So I think we've kind of answered this before, but I'll ask it just in case there's anything that you want to add to it. But So what role do you think Hispanics or Latinos play in working toward racial justice? Is there a role?
Sure. I mean, just to build on what Madelene and Sunny and what all the panelists said is, there's a lot of overlap between Latinx concerns and Black Lives Matter concerns. And I don't think there's anybody in the country who would say, I'm not concerned with justice. I think the issue is, like in our community, there are a variety of political positions along a spectrum. There's various ideas about skin color, but in my mind, those are really those are things that I believe, maybe naively, can be addressed, because we can't make progress individually. We have to work together. We're stronger together, and that's the only way that we make progress. When all ships rise, or whatever the phrase is, whatever the saying is. So in my experience, Latinx concerns are, Black Lives Matter concerns, and we're natural allies by nature, in my case by choice, but I do believe just by nature, because what it is a reminder, is a very strong and stark reminder that we still have a lot of work to do to make the American dream and the American plan a reality. We still have a lot of work to do. And that's because I think that it's because the work never ends. It's something that must be taken up and taken further by every generation. And I think what we're seeing is this generation, a younger generation, this is how it's going to be done. And I think the choices before us are very simple. Do we stand on the side of justice? Are we part of the solution? Are we part of the American village that says, yes, we do this. We can progress. We can be better. We can form a more perfect union. I mean, for me, that's a no-brainer. Yes, emphatically yes. And so this is something that can also be derailed by a lot of rhetoric, a lot of cruel and poisonous rhetoric. Because if you ask people, are you for justice? They would say, yes, of course I'm for justice. Or, who is against justice? I have never met a single person who says, you know what, I don't like justice. Justice is bad. Everybody wants that. So that's our connection. And our connection to Black Lives Matter is sometimes the very thing that can serve, like Ydania said, to divide us. Our color. Colorism is a reality in our community, but it's also the thing that can bring us together. Let's look at who we are. We're different colors. We're different dialects. We're different regions. And I think we're big enough and strong enough that we should be able to handle that, and not say, we're never all going to be the same. We're never going to be the same color. We're never going to be the same size. All families are going to be, like this. And so our family is very large, very diverse, and I think by nature in it, there's a huge overlap with Black Lives Matter. I think it's a natural overlap, and I'm pleased to see that many Latinx people are, have joined this, this desire for justice in our country. I think it's the right thing to do. I applaud it.
Thank you very much. So that was just an eloquent way to really wrap up what we've been talking about today. And I appreciate all of the insight and feedback that you've provided as panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you for participating today. To all of our listeners, thank you very much for being here today. I do want to also share that as we wrap up, we will be having another meeting like this for students on October 5th at noon. It will be Nuestras Voces with students, where we'll have current students and hopefully an alum as well to talk about their perspective and similar questions and their thoughts. So I just, again, thank you very much for being here today, for taking the time, and happy Hispanic Heritage Month again. And Melissa Roy, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to share. If not, I will conclude and thank everyone for being here.
Everyone for joining us. I want to particularly mention that we did have a trustee with us today, Mary Lou Dillon, and we appreciate her support. So I do appreciate everybody attending. I just want to clarify that the student presentation will be on October 8th, Thursday, October 8th, instead of the 5th at noon. Thanks again, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one.